Story 1. Because of the morning after. When you feel like a hollow and anxiety-ridden puddle of a human. I was a fun drunk. Not a fighter, not an angry person, not sloppy, and so on. So, making the transition out of alcohol use was a hard one for my friends and family to understand. It seems people need a big messy explosion to justify sobriety, but my explosion was an implosion. A deep self-hatred that no one felt but my hungover zombie brain. Story 2. Recovering alcoholic here. There was no single incident that made me give it up, but rather a series of mental and physical health problems, combined with family, employer, and financial stresses that made my habit untenable. However, one incident can stand as emblematic of those problems. On New Year's Eve going into 2020, I was at a house party with my wife and kids. I drank even more than usual, almost two 26-ounce bottles of whiskey to myself, and shortly after midnight, I decided to take a taxi home. I pieced this story together the day after because I don't remember much after getting to the party. My daughter, who was 12 at the time, asked to come with me, and so we headed out into the cold and snowy night, as I'm Canadian, to meet up with our ride. Somehow we missed the rendezvous, and I was too wasted to call another ride, so we headed back to the party and got lost. Despite only being about a block away, we wandered around for close to an hour before we finally found the place. My wife was shocked and scared that we were outside for so long, and we engaged in a raucous screaming argument in front of all the other guests, friends, and strangers alike, until the hosts were going to call the police. Finally, my brother-in-law drove me home. The next day, I woke up in an empty house with no recollection of what happened or how I got home or where my family was. Even though nobody was harmed physically, I know this event has left a lasting negative impression on my kids. I realized as I reflected that I could easily have slipped and passed out in the snow and died, and my daughter very well might have gotten frostbite or, God forbid, even worse. It didn't happen immediately, but that was the trigger for me realizing that I was going to have to do the hard work of quitting. After some pandemic-related setbacks, I'm over 18 months sober. Story 3. The hangovers. Yes, it's fun at the time, but the hangover costs me a day. As you get older, time is precious. I'd rather not spend 2 days hungover for one night of drunkenness. It's a waste. Story 4. Pancreatitis and 3 days in the hospital. Oddly, the 2 weeks leading up to me getting sick, I kept having dreams every night about an African-American man I've never met before telling me I had to stop because it was killing me. One of the dreams had me ending up in the hospital, and he told me, "This is where you're going to end up if you don't quit. I've been sober for over a year and am not going back. Thanks to the dream guy for not giving up on me." Story 5. Liver, gallbladder, pancreas malfunction, acid reflux and esophageal scarring, anxiety from withdrawal or hangover, sleep disruption, weight gain, bad decisions, being absent from friends and family. Story 6. I've had a problem my whole life, still looking for a way to quit. After a 1.5-year run sober, I am now 44 days sober. I guess you'd call me a well-controlled alcoholic. Story 7. One night I was drunk and was inconsiderate to my wife. I quit drinking. I had been married for 25 years and had never behaved that way towards her. I am not an alcoholic and very rarely get drunk, but there I was, drunk and inconsiderate to the person who deserved it the least in my life. It took a while for my wife to realize that I was consistently not having a beer in the evening. She finally asked if it had anything to do with how I acted that night, and I told her that I would much rather not drink alcohol if that was the trigger for treating her that way. She started bringing me a beer every night until I eventually started accepting them. Her rationale was that she had forgiven me by the next day, she knew I didn't have a drinking problem, and that my actions were just a result of a combination of things occurring at the same time when my stress level was highest and my guard was the lowest. If she forgave me so quickly, why had I not forgiven myself? So now I enjoy my beer, but if it were to happen again, I probably wouldn't drink again. Story 8. It's an addiction for sure, but do you know what's even more addictive? The quality of sleep you get without alcohol and that wonderful feeling of waking up clear-headed and full of energy. And having a clear memory of what was said and done the night before, not feeling the shame of not being able to remember. Story 9. It makes me think very dark thoughts about checking out. Not worth the risk if a poison like that can subvert my normal happy brain and make me think the world would be better off without me. It also causes a lot of anxiety in the 2 weeks after drinking. Seriously, it takes about 100 days for your brain chemistry to start balancing out. Try going 100 days at least without alcohol, and I bet you will be shocked at how much better you feel overall even after the fact. Story 10. I struggle with alcoholism. I am trying to quit, but the cravings get me sometimes. I cannot control myself once I have a drink. I become unhinged, unstable, and don't know my limits. Part of me is afraid to stop also because it's a wake-up call for my life. I am a self-sabotaging person and am afraid of calmness and being happy. I've gone to meetings before, but never consistently. This has also been really therapeutic to type out. Story 11. My crippling addiction and inability to manage my life while using it did it for me. Multiple rehabilitation centers and much pain later, of course. I've been sober for a while now, and it's the best choice I finally made. Story 12. I gave up alcohol after a long life of it killing the friends and family around me. My father, like his father before him, and all of my aunts and uncles were alcoholics. As a young teen, my friends were killed and some were survivors of a major drinking and driving accident. I became an alcoholic at 19 as a parent of 2. I was in a family where drinking was the norm, so no one batted an eye. Later, when a medical crisis with my partner, who did not drink, led us to be homeless, I became blackout drunk. I lost more of my homeless community to the bottle, liver disease, fights where people bled out, people who lost it all because of the bottle, people who I had known years ago and now they are permanently drunk. Their brain is so gone from the bottle. I am blessed. I only got a few scars. I found the will to stop before my liver is gone or I have diabetes. My community going to hell, all the friends I lost as victims, all the times I could have made better choices. All the times I want to see one more sunrise myself. That's why I stopped alcohol and it's worth it. I've been clean 6 years. Story 13. I was a heavy drinker for years. Woke up with a hangover one morning and was super dizzy. Chalked it up to a sinus infection. Went to urgent care for medication. My blood pressure was 240/160. Hypertensive crisis. I quit cold turkey that day. Almost 3 years sober. I would never go back. Story 14. Traded it for exercise once my son was born. There is nothing worse than having to wake up at 5:30 a.m. hungover, knowing you can't go back to sleep and have to keep a human alive. Did 1 month sober, felt amazing, and just kept it going from there. I save it for celebrations now. Story 15. Withdrawals. Shaking like a leaf, hallucinating, vomiting while nonstop, crippling anxiety, heart pounding out of my chest, sweating so much my bed sheets get drenched, and not being able to sleep for 5 days. I never want to go through that again. I know if it happens again, I'll need to go to the hospital as my body can't handle another withdrawal. Story 16. I've lost 85 pounds with a lot of hard work. I walk 10 miles a day. Alcohol is just too many calories to sacrifice after all of my hard work. So weight loss and sustaining it would make me give it up. Story 17. 3 weeks sober. I never want to drink again, and here's why. I felt like such shit every single day. Exhausted all the time and like a zombie for the first half of every day. It's too easy to make drinking a habit and it's way too hard to quit. So now that I've broken the habit, I don't want to have to go through that again. Story 18. I always drank very seldom. Beer with dinner here and there while at a restaurant. Then I started getting beer every time at a restaurant. Got one at a restaurant a while back that I thought was so good I thought about it very often at home. To the point where I really wanted it. It was at that point I just gave up drinking completely. I know if I keep walking around the edge of that volcano that I'll fall in. Can't do that to my family. Story 19. I decided I wanted to be happy. Healthy living now makes me happy. Eating right, sleeping enough, monitoring my mental health, and not drinking alcohol. I wake up happy and I can better manage the bad. Story 20. It's literally poison. When you get drunk, it's because you poison yourself. I don't like the way it makes me feel the next day. It's like borrowing happiness from tomorrow. Story 21. I tried and failed many times. What finally did it was having a roommate who was more of an alcoholic than me. He would take food when he was drunk, but then replace it the next day. He was generally kind of a jerk when he was drunk. That ultimately dispelled the little lie I was subconsciously telling myself that being a drunk is a lovable kind of thing, that I was somehow reliving the glory days of when I go to some pretty epic parties. No, being a drunk around sober people is at least pretty annoying and pathetic. That put the final nail in the coffin. It shattered the false identity that I had built up about my relationship with alcohol. It also helped having a smartwatch that tracked my sleep so that I could objectively see how much worse my sleep was while being drunk, and also how high my heart rate was while sleeping, sometimes 100 beats per minute average, and how much higher it was while working out. Story 22. I was homeless and friendless. My wife of 18 years left me because I couldn't quit drinking. My daughter doesn't talk to me anymore, and my family doesn't believe me. I was also addicted to meth and gambling. In and out of jail, I was the town drunk. My health was failing, and I wasn't working, having slipped into psychosis. Nothing was working. It was the poorest coping mechanism you could ever imagine. I was in absolute total hell. I'm 10.5 months sober now. Living in transitional housing, court dates are over, and I am a free man. A free man with a job, money in the bank, a few friends, and things are slowly starting to work out. Story 23. I quit after having my best friend admitted to the hospital. He was dying from years of alcohol abuse. We were in the military together. He died weeks later at 53. Story 24. I spent almost 20 years of my life trying to kill myself with alcohol. I had been drinking heavily before that. I grew up with an extremely violent, abusive, and emotionally unavailable father, and come from a long lineage of drunks on both sides of the family. Angry, violent drunks at that. Being in the late 80s and early 90s punk scene, I had plenty of opportunities to act out in settings where not only was it not looked down on, but it was encouraged. The drinking really accelerated and went aground after my breakup with my ex, Jennifer. From there, it was a litany of some of the most odious, obnoxious, and criminal drunken behavior you've ever seen. I'm sure somewhere in Northeast Ohio, there are still dust-encrusted, 20-something-year-old bench warrants moldering in some dusty court repository for stupid things I did when I was abysmally drunk and in one of my monumental self-hating phases. As others in recovery have mentioned, it wasn't one thing that made me finally quit. It was a buildup of things. But the main reason was that I eventually had a son of my own. As he grew, I started seeing myself basically becoming my dad with him. History repeating itself. When I realized that I was turning into the very monster that had tormented me as a child, and I was revisiting that on my own son, I was horrified. I checked myself into a 6-month rehab and haven't touched a drop since. Now, I want to add something that I know may not go down well with some people, but what the heck? One of the reasons I stay sober is because of a tool I learned in rehab. My counselor made the observation that one of the reasons I drank was out of boredom sometimes. He suggested I pick up the hobbies and interests I had before the big drinking binge. And I did. I started gaming again, collecting and building toys, models, prop replicas, voice acting, and writing. One of the other interests I re-engaged in was an interest in the paranormal. During one of my little investigations, whatever you want to call it, I had an experience. One that was extremely personal, direct, and in a form of communication I could not write off as anything other than paranormal. I come from a science-oriented family. I know what happened. I know what I experienced. And that changed me. No, I didn't run to a preacher. I still look at this as science more than superstition. It's just a branch of science our culture is incapable or unwilling to accept at this point in our evolution. But it did make me think and realize that all of this is probably bigger and more complicated than we will ever realize. For me, drinking at this point would be like compounding one illusion with another. A dream within a dream. Take that as you will. Story 25. OP trying to sell something here. I just can't put my finger on it. Oh, I just looked up your website. It wasn't just a question. It was a sales pitch. Story 26. I was put on benzodiazepines at 14, and strangely no doctor has ever told me I couldn't have alcohol with them. I just intuited that it would be a bad idea, so I never have had alcohol. Turns out my intuition was correct. Benzodiazepines and alcohol are quite deadly together. They're chemically quite similar to alcohol, but much more targeted. Bad stuff. Story 27. I realized I could drink all night because I love the taste of alcohol. We have addicts in the family. Also, sweating out alcohol to the point of tasting it at the gym is unpleasant. Nowadays, I can have the occasional drink with restraint, but it took a long time, and I still avoid it as it's been so long and I don't want to slip back. Story 28. My death because I would be dead. I rarely drink until I'm drunk, but I can really enjoy a good strong Belgian beer, like Duvel, St. Bernardus, Roquefort, Westmalle, Westfiltrin, and a glass of whiskey. I actually hate being drunk, don't like the loss of control, the dizziness, and I get really tired. So maybe if they can make those beers or whiskey that taste and feel exactly the same without alcohol in them, I would maybe stop drinking alcohol too.